Hi everyone, my name's Ebony. Welcome back to another video.
Think I know you better to forget her. Certain people made for running. Think I need you more than let you know I'm bored and tell me this means more than nothing.
So today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in June, and I read a lot of books in June. I read 21 books, which is wild. First things first, the bullet journal. So here's my June wrap-up page. It's a little bit of a sneak peek of what you're going to see in this video. Here's my page tracker from June. As you can see, down here is where I read a lot of pages, and up here is where I read no pages. So there was a lot of jumping around this month. So here's my book stats page. So like I said, in June, I read 21 books. I read 7,112 pages. I read 7 physical books, which is a lot for me because like the most physical books I had read before this month was 5. So 7 it's a good number. And then I read 14 audiobooks and I had 2 rereads. To jump in to all the books I read this month. The first thing I read this month was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this is Taylor Jenkins Reid's newest book. When we got this book at the bookstore, I immediately bought it and then came home and started it. Like, I read the first 50 pages the day that I bought it. So if you don't know, Taylor Jenkins Reid is a very, very popular author of Daisy Jones and the Six and Evelyn Hugo. And so this is her newest book, and it is a signed copy. Ooh, let's look at the signature. There it is. So this is her newest book, and it follows 4 siblings who are famous in their own right, but also famous because their father is a very well-known singer from the 60s named Mick Riva. And so we follow the 4 of his kids. And so the book is told in dual timelines. So on one timeline, it is the day of the famous party that the 4 siblings throw every year. It's the famous Riva party. It's the place to be in Malibu. You want to be there. And it's like sort of exclusive as well. It's always a wild time. And so there's one timeline where it's just the day of the party, and then we get lots of flashbacks of how their parents met, how they grew up, all the hardships that the children have been through in their life. So you really, really get to know an in-depth like look at these characters. This book is very much a character-driven story. And one thing that I really enjoyed about this book is that, especially when the party starts going, you will get like a brief chapter, like 2 or 3 pages, of just one of the attendees of the party, and you get to know like who they are, what they want, what they're looking for in this party, like what they're wanting to get out of it. And Taylor Jenkins Reid really makes you care about every single character that gets brought up, even the ones that you only spend 3 pages with. It's really interesting because like you'll read a page about this one character like way earlier, and then like that character comes back into play with the Riva kids, and you're like, whoa, like that's how it connects. Whoa, so cool. I really enjoyed this book. It was fairly quick paced, and I read the majority of this book during a 24-hour readathon that I did with Stephanie and Jess. So if you want to check out that video, you can. I talk about it more in that video. So I really enjoyed the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid was able to develop the characters. The one thing that I didn't care so much for in this book is the climax. I felt like the climax kind of fell flat a little for me. Like there wasn't like anything that was like life-changing for me in the climax. However, I did really like the conclusion. It was a really good way to end the book. So I still gave it 5 stars. I loved it. It was so good, and I highly recommend. Taylor Jenkins Reid does not disappoint. Next, I reread The Selection by Kiera Cass. I reread this because Mare from Mare Reads is hosting a selection read-along. They were hosting it more in like May and early June, and so like not really many people are active on the Discord anymore. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna reread them. And then I only reread this one. I do want to still reread the rest of the books, and I still haven't read the very last book. What is it? The Crown, I think. So, but I do want to reread them because they're so quick. Like, I'm pretty sure I read this in like 2 sittings. I listened to the audiobook, and it's just such a quick book, and it's a good one if you're feeling a little slumpy. You're able to just like breeze through this, and then you feel really accomplished. So if you don't know, the selection takes place in a dystopian USA where they're ruled by a monarchy. And so when the prince is ready to get married, they have this thing called the selection, which is like a bachelorette-esque type of competition where there's 35 girls and then he gets to know them all and then he eventually chooses who's going to be his wife. And so we follow the main character, America, who comes from a family of like a lower class who gets chosen for the selection, and there's a little bit of a love triangle in there, there's lots of drama, and it's very fun and a very quick read. I highly recommend. And I gave this one 4 stars. It's the same rating I gave it the first time when I read it last December. And then I read The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. So this is a book that I had been wanting to reading. One, because it's at the book, I see it at the bookstore a lot, and so I'm like, oh, if I read it, I'll do my job better. You know, like I'll know what it's about. And then 2, because I actually have a tote bag with the cover art on it, and so I was like, well, if I have a tote bag, I need to like read the book, and so I know what this book is even about. It was actually on my Studio Ghibli readathon TBR, which I'll show you the spread that I did for that readathon. There she is. I still haven't colored this one in because I haven't finished that book yet. Nevertheless, this book was on my Studio Ghibli readathon TBR. Basically, it follows this girl who goes to, is it London? I don't know, somewhere in Europe, I can't remember. And she's having a little bit of issues with her marriage, and so she goes to London. It was supposed to be like a trip for her and her husband, but because of their issues, she goes by herself. And she ends up discovering the like myth of this lost apothecary, and so she really digs into trying to find out what happened to the apothecary, all of the secrets that the apothecary holds. And so this book is also told in dual timeline, where you have the timeline of the main character trying to learn what happened to the apothecary, and then the timeline in the past of when the apothecary was still up and running. I will say I listened to this on audiobook, and I didn't mind the narrator for the main character, but I didn't like the narrator who did the flashback timeline, because it was like they were the narrator of the woman who owned the apothecary, and it just sounded like an old lady was reading it, and I don't know, I just didn't vibe with her voice. It kind of like hurt my ears, so I didn't really like that aspect. I think that sort of like ruined the experience a little bit for me. I did give this one 3 stars. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it wasn't like awful. I just sort of felt like neutral about it. And then I read Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doughty. So this is actually a nonfiction book, and I don't read much nonfiction, but I was working at the bookstore one day and we were shelving books, and I saw this book, and like the cover caught my attention, and also the title, like Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, is a wild title. And so I read like the first 2 pages while I was in the store, and I was like, I really like this writing style. And then I found out I could get it on audiobook, and I was like, heck yeah. So I actually read it in like 2 sittings. I started it that night when I got off work, and I fell asleep listening to it, and then I finished it the next morning. So it was a very quick read. I think the audiobook was only like 5 hours. And the audiobook was narrated by the author, so that always is a good thing for me. I like when the author narrates their own books. So the author of this book is a mortician, and so it's just her writing and answering questions that she gets about dead bodies, how bodies decay. And so it was really interesting because she was very funny, so it was like a good like combination of like this really like macabre kind of creepy topic, and it was also like mixed really well with the like comedic relief that the author had. So that it was a really great combination there. Loved the writing style, and I learned a lot while I was reading it, and I think I would definitely like to read this again because I feel like there was some stuff that I missed while listening to the audiobook. So this would definitely be one that I wouldn't mind reading again because it was so funny and so good and interesting. I learned stuff, so like who knew, right? You can learn from books, what? But yeah, like I said, I don't read a lot of nonfiction, so this was a real surprise for me when I read it, and then I actually really enjoyed it. And I gave this book 5 stars. I didn't know if I should rate a nonfiction book, but I was like, to heck with it, I enjoyed it so much, we're giving it 5 stars. And then I read Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing by Lauren Hugh. So this book has a lot of controversy around it that I didn't know when I started the audiobook. I mostly just read it because I had seen people buy it at the bookstore, and I knew it was a memoir, and I tend to enjoy memoirs, and so I was like when I saw it on Libby, I was like, hey, I'll check it out, I'll give it a read, maybe I'll be able to talk to customers about it. I read the audiobook. I didn't really enjoy it that much. It was narrated by both the author and Cate Blanchett, I believe. And I think it was the author's narration that, like, I didn't care for her voice that much. It was kind of like scratchy, and it just didn't like sound good into my ears. But like the story was pretty cool. The main character is part of the LGBT plus community, and she grew up in a cult, so it was like some really interesting aspects about her life. Did I say the main character? I meant the author. I knew what I meant. So after I finished this book and I went to mark it as read on Goodreads and Storygraph, I noticed that it has one of the lowest ratings I had ever seen on Goodreads and Storygraph, and I was like, why is that? Like, I was just gonna give it 3 stars. Like, I wasn't like a huge fan of it, but I was just like, it was okay, you know? And so like I like started scrolling through the comments on Goodreads, and apparently the author isn't the greatest person. Apparently, like, some people left her a 4.5 star review on Goodreads, and she screenshotted that and tweeted about it and said some not so nice things about those reviewers. All of those screenshots were all over Goodreads. Like, just go look this book up on Goodreads if you really want to see all the tea. Because of that, a lot of people are like rating this book as like a 1 star, or even marking it as like books I'll never read and like stuff like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that there was so much drama around this book. So because of like the author being a terrible person, I did lower my rating to a 2 star. Like I said, I didn't really like love the book anyway, but like that just like really soured my opinion of this book, because like I feel like I was lied to, you know? Like, this is a memoir. Spend so much time with the author, you feel like you kind of know a little bit about them, but then like this like totally like changed how I felt about the book, basically, because like I'm like, oh, I feel like I was lied to the entire book, because this person who is tweeting does not match up with the person I read about in this book. So that wasn't so fun. Next, I read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is one of those books that I've had on my TBR for years, and I've always meant to read it and I like never got around to it. And then I noticed, I don't even remember who it was, but somebody was like hosting a live show discussion about this book, and I was like, you know, it's time for me to read this book. I did intend to watch that live show, but then like I never did, but I did read the book. So basically this book follows the main character, April, who lives in New York, and one day she's just like walking around and she notices this like statue of this like humanoid kind of statue thing, and so she like calls a friend and they make like a funny little video like interviewing it, just like having a good time. And then that video goes viral because these statues, which they call Carls, appeared everywhere in the world, like in all the major cities, just overnight. Nobody knows where they came from, nobody knows what they are. And so there's just like really a lot of mystery in this book. You're like, what is going on? And like the more you get into it, the more you're confused. And it was a wild time. I read this book in a day. I could not put the audiobook down. I needed to know what happened. I loved this book. It was so good. I gave it 5 stars. And then after I finished this book, I immediately started the sequel, which we will talk about in a little bit. So the next 3 books I read were Heartstopper Volumes 2, 3, and 4. So I'm just going to talk about all of them right now, because honestly, I don't know if I can differentiate between which ones are which, because I read them all like back to back, except like I read the first one in May, but I read volumes 2, 3, and 4 back to back. I don't really remember what happened in which one. But basically these are graphic novels by Alice Oseman, and they follow 2 characters, Nick and Charlie, and they have this really cute relationship that is just like, it melts your heart. It's so sweet. But as we get into like the volumes 3 and 4, there starts to be some mental health representation there, so like trigger warning for eating disorders and depression. I really enjoyed the way that Alice Oseman was able to bring in the mental health rep into this story that was already like set, and give it almost a little bit more depth. I did really enjoy the eating disorder representation. As you may know, I do love a good eating disorder book. I did enjoy all of these books. I gave the first 2 graphic novels 3 stars, but I gave the second 2 4 stars. So like my enjoyment has grown as I've read them. At first I was sort of like meh about the books because I wasn't really like invested that much. but by now I'm definitely invested in these characters and their story, and I hope that there's a 5th volume coming out. I'm not sure if there is, but I hope there is. And next I read Good Morning, Good Night, Little Pep Talks from Me to You by Lin-Manuel Miranda and illustrated by Johnny Sun. And so this is a book that I got from the bookstore because we can get damaged copies as employees. We can get them for free. And I saw a damaged copy of this, and Johnny Sun is the author of Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too, and that's one of my favorite graphic novels. So I was like, yeah, Johnny Sun, heck yeah. Like, I was really excited for this. And as you may have guessed, it's just like cute little like quotes from Lin-Manuel Miranda. I think that they might be tweets, like tweets that he does every morning and every night. That's like, good morning, appreciate your life, good night, say thanks for the life that you have. And like just like little pep talks, like the title says. And so they're like, the pages are real short. And there's some cute little illustrations. As you can see, I did tab this book. I did read it in one sitting just because I was like, I want to read this. It's on my shelf. It'll be short. I'm going to read it. But I did tab it, so like that way if I'm like ever feeling down or like I need like a little pick-me-up, I can just like come over and like open to one of my tabs and read one of the little pep talks and it'll help me feel a little bit better. I really enjoyed this book. I didn't give it a rating because to me it felt almost like poetry, and I don't like to rate poetry because it's so subjective. You can definitely miss stuff when you're reading poetry if you're not like really deeply analyzing it. And to me this book kind of felt like poetry, and it didn't feel like a book that you would need to rate, you know? So I didn't give this book a rating, but I did enjoy it. Very good. Then I read The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. So this is the last book in the Raven Boys. This series has been quite a process for me. I read the first book on audiobook last like August or September, October, somewhere around there. And I read the audiobook and I'm like, I have no idea what happened in this book. And so in December, when I did my December fantasy challenge, I decided to try it again, but read it physically because like it's easy to miss stuff when you read fantasy on audio. So I read it again and I'm like, I still don't know what's happening. And so like I was about to write this series off. I was like, maybe this series just isn't for me. Then my friend Katie from Katie Can't Read said she was hosting a Raven Cycle read-along in April. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll give it another shot. And so I think I read The Dream Thieves and Blue Lily Lily Blue both in April, but I never got around to reading the last book, The Raven King, until just now. I still don't know what's happening. I started to like feel like I kind of got what was happening when I was reading The Dream Thieves, but then Blue Lily Lily Blue happened and I'm like, okay, I'm lost again. So, I mean, I did have one of my coworkers at the bookstore who has read this series and really likes it sort of give me a little rundown of what happened in the last book. Because, like, I do, like, kind of know what's happening, but it's just the writing style. I just don't think the writing style is for me. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but, like, every time I, like, try to read this book series, it just goes right over my head. Like, I do not comprehend it. I did end up giving this 3 stars. Like I said, it's not really the book's fault, it's more my fault. I just don't think Maggie Stiefvater's writing is for me. And then I read the Vampire Academy graphic novel by Rochelle Mead. So this is a graphic novel adaptation of the first book in the Vampire Academy series. And there are graphic novels for the first 3 books in the Vampire Academy series that I'll probably end up buying at some point and reading, because while I did give this 3 stars and it like was not the best way to consume this story, I love Vampire Academy. I want to read the story in like every way possible. If you don't know, I am doing a reading vlog of reading like Vampire Academy like side novels. Unfortunately, this is the only one that I read so far for that vlog, so that vlog probably won't be out for a long time. But I have read one of the books for that vlog, so we're making progress. Like I said, this is not the best way to read this book. I recommend, if you haven't read Vampire Academy, just read the book. Like, this is for like hardcore fans like me who are just like so dedicated to this series that they want to read literally everything that this series has to offer. I will say, as far as graphic novels go, I did not like the art style at all. I think it's weird and I'm not really a huge fan of it. Also, the graphic novel felt like it took a long time for anything to happen, and then like boom, everything happened at once and you're like, what? Like I said, I am doing a vlog of this, and my boyfriend and I actually read this together because he's read Vampire Academy as well. We both kind of talked about our feelings in that vlog, so whenever it comes out you will get more thoughts on this book. If you're a diehard Vampire Academy fan like me, I do recommend checking it out just to read the story in another way, but if you haven't read Vampire Academy, just read the book. Don't start with the graphic novel. And then I read A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green, like I talked about. So it feels like I've talked about a lot of books since I talked about An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, but to be fair, I read all the Heartstopper volumes like in the same day, and I'm pretty sure I read these two books and I finished The Raven King also on the same day. So like it really wasn't that long in between starting A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, because I started it the day I finished An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, and then actually finishing that book, I think it was like 6 days or something, so it wasn't that long, but I just read a lot of books in between that time. So anyway, A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor is, of course, the sequel to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, and An Absolutely Remarkable Thing ended on a cliffhanger, so I'm like, I need to know what happened. So of course I immediately started this book, and then this book sort of was slower than An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing was narrated by just April, and there was like a chapter or two narrated by one other character, but for the majority of it, it was just April. This book is narrated by like all of the characters that are in the book. So like there was a lot of different voice actors, which I did appreciate that there were multiple voice actors and not just one voice actor trying to do all the characters, but it did make it, I don't want to say more confusing, but it's just, I prefer to just have one, maybe two narrators. When you start getting above 3 narrators, I sort of start like losing it a little bit. I just like following one character. And so there was a lot of narrators in this book for me, and there was like a whole other plot line about like Alta, which is this like program. It's like a video game, but it's like VR, but you're in your own head, and it's like taken over, and there's like a wild plot line that feels like it has nothing to do with the original plot line in An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. And so for a while I was like, how do these books connect? I'm confused. Of course you do eventually like figure out how they connect, but like it just felt like 2 different books for a while. I really enjoyed An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. I liked the world that was set up in that book, but like this book didn't really carry on with that very much. And so, I don't know, I kind of lost a little bit of interest. However, it was still really good, and I did give it 4 stars. I just didn't enjoy it as much as An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. And then I finished Love and Olives by Jenna Evans Welch. If you haven't been watching my vlogs, I started this audiobook in February. Because I had a like month free trial of Scribd, and so I was reading all the books on Scribd that I couldn't get like on Libby, and so I'd started this book, but then I like lost my free trial, and I didn't, at the time I didn't want to pay for another month because I was really busy with school. And so I was like, I'm not really gonna like get my money's worth out of a month, so I didn't want to start a free trial, but I knew I would eventually. I just didn't want to do it then. Around this time I decided it was time for me to pay for a month of Scribd. I decided, what the heck, I'm gonna go for it, and so I finally finished this book. I had been reading it for like 4 months, but I finally finished it. I will say that this book is like 500 pages long. Like I think it might have been the longest book I read. Why is a contemporary book so freaking long? Like there's no reason for this. The Love and Something series by Jenna Evans Welch is just like 3 books that are all companion novels, and so I did read Love and Gelato and Love and Luck back in February, and like I said, I started this one, I just didn't get to finish it. And so like they are companion novels, so like they do kind of like mush together. I think in the second book, the main character is like the best friend of the main character from the first book. You don't have to read them in specific order, and like you will not spoil anything if you do, but like you can. And so I did read them in publication order, but like you don't have to. You don't even have to read all 3 of them. Honestly, if you're just gonna read one, I recommend reading Love and Gelato. I think that was the best one of the 3. So, Love and Olives, let me like get back to this book. The main character goes to Greece to be with her dad, who she hasn't seen for a very long time. And her dad's sort of obsessed with finding Atlantis. And so the one thing that this book did that the other books really didn't is that there is sort of a, not fantasy, but sort of like magical realism story, because obviously like Atlantis isn't really real, but in this book they do try to find Atlantis. So I don't know, I wasn't like upset with the fact that there was a little bit of magical realism, but I was like, okay, I'm here for it, you know, whatever. There is like a romance plotline, as there is with like all of these books. And the one thing I hate about YA like romance is when the character's like, oh, my stomach feels all like it's butterflies when I look at him. What's that about? You know, it's like, obviously you like him. Like, you don't have to be so coy about it. Like, you could just, you know, like, I don't need this. So, I don't know. I was just really annoyed because this book did a lot of that, where the character, like, didn't realize that she liked him, even though she had all of these like bodily reactions that obviously means she has a crush on him, you know? But I did like the Atlantis plotline, so this book was okay. I gave it 4 stars, but like leaning more towards a 3. If I was doing 0.5s, it probably would be a 3.5, but I just gave it a 4 stars. I gave it the benefit of the doubt. Next, I reread Wake by Lisa McMahon. This I also read for the Studio Ghibli readathon. One of the prompts was to like reread a favorite book from your childhood. This book I read in like middle school, and it has been one of my favorite books ever since then. I read this book 8 times, which is the most times I've ever read a book. I absolutely adore this book. I can read it in like 2 hours. It's super short. It's only 210 pages. The pages are nicely broken up by like timestamps. So like the pages really don't take that long to get through, and the font is fairly big. And so I actually made Will read this with me because it's just so quick, and I absolutely love this book. I know it's not for everybody. The writing style is very blunt and very just like, here's what happened. It's not very lyrical at all, and it doesn't take a lot of mental capacity to read it. And I know that that kind of writing style just isn't for everybody, but I love it. I gave this one a reread. It, of course, 5 stars. I love this book. The whole series I love, but this book in particular holds a very special place in my heart. If you haven't heard me talk about this book before, it follows this main character named Janie, who has this gift slash curse that if someone is dreaming near her, she will fall into their dream. And she doesn't know why this is happening. This has just always happened for as long as she can remember. And it's very slice of life, just like following Janie from day to day and seeing her life, seeing the things that she has to deal with this gift slash curse. And there is a little bit of like mystery that comes in at the end of it. And the second book is a lot more of like discovering a mystery sort of plot line there. I love it, but like I know the writing style is not for everybody. Next, I read The Girls at 17 Swann Street by Yara Zagib. I really need to learn how to say the author's last name. So I read this book for a vlog I'm doing of mental health eating disorder representation. I'm still doing that vlog, so I don't know when it's coming out, but I do talk about this book in that vlog. This book follows the main character, Anna, who has an eating disorder, and so she goes to treatment, and it's very much a character study about Anna's life and how she's handling her eating disorder. I will say that I did appreciate how old the character was in this story, because most eating disorder books I read are YA. This is technically adult. And so the main character is an adult, she is married, and so she has to think about her husband as well while she's going through treatment, which is an aspect you don't really get from YA books that have this theme. As I mentioned, I do love eating disorder books for whatever reason. I'm weird. So this was a very good one in terms of representation. I gave it 4 stars. I did enjoy it. It wasn't like my favorite eating disorder book of all time, because that book is very hard to touch because it's my favorite book of all time. But I did still very much enjoy it, and I'm happy I read it. And then I read The Duff by Cody Keplinger. So this was also on my mental health vlog TBR, because I had been told that there is slight eating disorder representation in this book. However, I believe I was lied to, because I did not see any eating disorder representation in this book. Basically, this book follows the main character who finds out she's the Duff of her group, or the designated ugly fat friend. Honestly, this book mostly focused around this like friends with benefits relationship she had with this guy who she doesn't like. yet she still like sleeps with him and like has this sort of weird relationship with him. So like most of the book followed that plot line. It's kind of like an enemies to lovers sort of situation there. There is a movie based off this book. I have not seen the movie, and from what I've seen from trailers of the movie and what I read in this book, I think that the movie is very different. I'm not sure, I haven't seen it, but I would like to, because I think that the movie still looks good. I just think it looks different than what I read in this book. But like I said, there was no eating disorder representation that I saw, so I was a little bit bummed, but I did also read this book for that vlog, the eating disorder vlog that I read this book for. I still enjoyed it, even though it didn't have eating disorder rep. It was just a cute little YA romance contemporary, but I was a little bummed that it didn't have the representation I was promised, but I gave it 4 stars. And then I read Howl's Moving Castle by Diane Wayne Jones. I read this book also for the Studio Ghibli Readathon TBR because this was the group book, and I also had it fill a couple of prompts for me. Basically, this is like the novel that the movie, the Studio Ghibli movie Howl's Moving Castle is based off of. But the movie Howl's Moving Castle is my favorite Studio Ghibli movie, and it has been for a very, very long time. I watched it ever since I was little, and so it has a lot of nostalgia for me. So I was excited to read this book, but also a little bit nervous because I had heard that they're very different, and that is true. I did like this book at first because you got some like backstory on Sophie and her family and like a little bit more lore than you get in the movie. But then the book started like going, and I don't know, it just felt more intense than the movie. I mean, the movie is about a war, but the movie is also fairly cute and lighthearted almost. The book felt like way darker than the movie. The characters weren't as lovable to me. Calcifer was almost kind of scary as a fire demon, and Howl was just annoying. I didn't find him lovable at all, whereas in the movie both those characters are very lovable. I'm pretty sure Markle, whose name is Michael in the book, is like more of a teenager, whereas in the movie he's a little boy, and I don't know. So like I think the movie was a lot cuter than the book, so unfortunately I didn't like the book that much. No fault against the books, I just have a preconceived notion of what this story is from seeing the movie so many times. So I did give the book 3 stars, but I'm not mad that I read it. It's good to like know the source material, I guess, for a movie that I love so much. And then I read One Great Lie by Deb Coletti. So this is an ARC that I got from the bookstore back in like January, and I just finally read it. It actually came out at the beginning of June, so I read it after the book came out. So I ended up reading it on audio. But like, look at how pretty the cover is. I'm obsessed with how pretty. Unfortunately, I didn't like the book as much as I was hoping I would. So basically this book follows a character who goes to Venice to study with this famous author, and so like there's that plot line, but then there's also a plot line of the main character finds out that she believes her ancestor wrote this like famous piece of writing but that was stolen by a guy, because like back in the day there is really nothing you could do about that kind of thing. And so there's like a mystery element there, and so it almost feels like there were two different books like mushed into one book. The plot line with the author and studying with him, who he ends up being kind of creepy, and there's lots that happens there. But then there's also like the plot line of like the ancestor and her missing writing, and like it just doesn't feel like they like combined together very well. Like it almost felt like the main character had like 2 separate parts of her life with separate like casts of people, and I just don't really know how they connect. I liked this book at first, but like just as it started going, I got bored and I wasn't really interested in what was happening. However, the ending was a lot like sadder and melancholic than I thought it would be. I was expecting this book to be a lot more fluffy than it ended up being. So just like keep that in mind beforehand. Definitely look up some trigger warnings if you decide to read this book, because it gives off the vibe that it's a cute summer romance, and I don't think that's not what it is. Overall, I gave this 3 stars. Wasn't my favorite. And then I read Darling by Kay Ancrum. So I read this book because I had like all the like bingo card prompts filled out for the Studio Ghibli Readathon except for a book with pirates. And that's because most books with pirates are fantasies, and I don't like reading fantasy, so I was like, anybody have any recommendations for a book with pirates that's not fantasy? And so Rachel from Let Me in the Library, who's one of the hosts, recommended this book to me, and I didn't know anything about it. I was like, okay, thanks. I saw I could get it on Scribd. Boom, I started reading it. And I didn't realize that it's actually a Peter Pan retelling. Like, I didn't realize until this guy breaks into the main character's window and is like, hi, I'm Peter Pan. And I'm like, oh, this is a Peter Pan retelling. Okay. So I've never actually seen the movie Peter Pan. I know what it is and like the story, I've just never seen it. And I don't tend to like retellings that much, but it was like a 6-hour audiobook, so I was like, what the heck, I'll just throw it on. It'll be fine, you know? I ended up giving it 3 stars. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of retellings or Peter Pan. I honestly liked the book more at the beginning when it was just a slice of life story and there was no action or Peter Pan-ness happening, which is probably blasphemous to say. But like I said, I didn't know it was Peter Pan retelling. Once like all the action started happening, I kind of started to lose interest in the characters, and I don't know, Tinkerbell was just like a normal girl, and it's just weird to think about Tinkerbell, who's supposed to be a fairy, just as a normal teenage girl. I don't know. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Wasn't a huge fan of it. And then the last book I read in June was A Sky Beyond the Storm by Saboteur. This is the last book in An Ember in the Ashes series. As you know, I don't really like fantasy. I read An Ember in the Ashes for my December Fantasy Challenge, and I actually didn't mind it. I kind of liked An Ember in the Ashes. I liked where the story was going. But just like as I continued the series, I stopped caring. Basically from A Torch Against the Night on, I stopped caring about what was really happening or the characters. I was buddy reading the series with Mare from Mare Reads. She actually DNF'd the 3rd book, and I read the 3rd book, and then I was like, well, I'm this far, I might as well read the last book. So I knew going into this book that I wasn't really going to care what was happening, but I wanted to finish the series just to say that I've done it. I don't know, I'm very much a completionist. I know most people would probably just DNF a series they don't like, but I like finishing series. I like finishing books. That's why I don't like DNFing. Unfortunately, like I said, I didn't care for this book or this series for the most part, but I have finished them now. Okay, so that's all the books I read this month. I read so much. I've talked so much, my throat hurts, but thank you all so much for watching this video. If you've read any of these books, or if you want to read any of these books, let me know down below. I'd love to talk to you about them. If you like this video, make sure you're subscribed down below, and follow me on social media if you would like to. Links are in the description box down below as always. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye!